In this section, we're going to talk about consumers and producers surplus, and we're going to agree on something here. And this will probably make sense. We're going to say that both the supply of some item and the demand for that item depend on the price of that item. So let's do this. Let's let P be S of X, where it means that price is a function, how about Fn for function, of supply. So the supply goes up, price goes down. The supply goes down, price goes up. So the price depends on the function, but also P equals D of X, which means that price is a function of demand. So this seems to make sense. The price of an item, it depends on the supply of the item. You would think as the supply goes up, the price would go down. And the price also depends on demand, right? As the demand goes up, you would think that the price would also increase. Now, I've got to say something about graphs here. When we typically graph, right, here's what we do. We put the independent variable here and the dependent variable here. So we might have X here and Y here, meaning that Y depends on X, right? Y is some function of X. And so we travel along this line. What is X doing? And then we'll see what Y is doing. So we could have a graph maybe that looks like this. And what would that say? That would say as X increases, Y decreases. So in our typical graphs, the independent variable is here, and the dependent variable is on the vertical. But that selection of independent on the horizontal and dependent on the vertical, that's just arbitrary. In economics, economists have chosen to do this. They've chosen to put the independent variable on the vertical and the dependent variable on the horizontal. This means that X is a function of Y. So you put Y into the expression and compute, and you get X back. So to get an idea of what this does, look at this curve here. How about a curve that looks like this? So now you got to get used to this. Normally we would like to read along here, right? As we go along here, you can see this function is increasing, but that's not what we're doing now. Now we're going to go here and see what happens. So as Y increases, what's happening to X? X is increasing in this case. All right, so as Y increases, X increases. So it's just all turned around, and it's something that we just have to get used to. Let's talk now about a concept in economics called the law of supply. Here's what a graph of this might look like. Now, normally, right, be careful. We usually like to go this way and then graph, and now we're going this way. So what does this say? Everything being equal, the quantity supplied increases as the price increases. So as the price increases, so as we go this way, right, as the price increases, the quantity supplied increases. That makes sense, doesn't it? Because as the price of something increases, suppliers, builders, are more likely to supply more of those. Let's get a feel for what this supply curve looks like. Let's start here with a low price. If the price is low, builders, manufacturers are less likely to build a lot of them, so supply would be small. But as demand increases, then builders or manufacturers are more willing to supply more of them. They'll build more. So as price goes up, manufacturers are willing to increase production. So that's our supply curve. As the price goes up, the supply goes up. Now, here's the demand curve. The law of demand says all else being equal, the quantity demanded, now this is by consumers, the quantity the consumers demand decreases as the price increases. Let's get a feel for this graph. Suppose you have a high price. Well, if you have a high price, consumers aren't going to demand very many of those. So X would be small, right? X is the number demanded. So at a high price, X would be small. But as the price goes down, more people would consider buying that product, so the demand goes up. So in this case, the graph looks like this. High price, low demand. As price goes down, demand goes up. So that is a demand curve. Let's take a close look at a particular feature of this graph here. This point right here where those lines intersect, there's a name for that point. This is the point of equilibrium. And now here's how we're going to view that point of equilibrium. I've got it right down here at the bottom. It says this: the point x sub e, p sub e. All right, so up here I'm calling this particular point x because it's on the x-axis, x sub equilibrium, p sub equilibrium. That point's on the y-axis, the vertical axis. I'm saying this, that point at which the supply equals the demand, right? Supply is equal to the demand right at that point. That's called the equilibrium point. And it represents the price consumers are willing to pay when X items are produced. And it also represents the price or the number of units that builders, manufacturers are willing to construct, make available at a certain price. So that point of equilibrium, here's what it is. It's the point of satisfaction for both the consumer and the supplier. Now at this equilibrium point, the consumer benefits. Since he was willing to pay a higher price than the equilibrium price, he was able to buy at a lower price and record a savings. Let's just see that. So look back over here on the graph over here. Here's the equilibrium price. Now, back over here, the price is higher, and this is a consumer, right? Because this is the number demanded by the consumer. So the consumer was willing to pay here, but the consumer got it for here. So he really had a savings. So we'll give that a name. That's called the consumer's surplus. The consumer was willing to pay a higher price, but got it at the equilibrium price, a lower price. So he saved some money. That we'll call that savings, a surplus. We'll call it the consumer's surplus, and we'll denote it with, how about CS? And now at that equilibrium point, the second thing is that the supplier will benefit also. Since he was willing to sell at a lower price, at a price lower than the equilibrium price, he was able to sell at a higher price and record a profit. So let's look at the graph here. Here's what it means. This is the supplier's curve. Okay, so the supplier's curve, this supplier was willing to sell at a price lower, right? Here's the equilibrium price. The supplier was willing to sell at a lower price, but than the equilibrium price. But if he got the equilibrium price, then he's going to get record a profit or a surplus. He was willing to sell down here, but he was able to sell up here. So we're going to call that the producer's surplus, and we will name it, how about PS? Sounds reasonable.